As the poor son of immigrants from Italy, few would have guessed that Amadeo Peter Giannini would one day create the world's largest bank. Though no apparent greed was to blame for such massive growth, instead stemming from tragedy early on in his life, he decided to serve the underserved in his community, earning him the title of the People's Banker. This is Learn Something New. The late 1800s were a rather hard time for Italians in America. Between 1880 and 1920, around 4 million Italian people immigrated to the United States. Many of those who arrived had a lack of education and had worked in unskilled labor positions back in Italy. And while many of those who arrived would help fuel the booming industrial economy of the time, as well as helping to create much of the infrastructure for the early 1900s, they were also looked down upon by many who were already residing within the country. Italians were discriminated against, and it wasn't rare for violence to break out, with one of the largest lynchings in American history occurring against 11 Italian-American immigrants after they had been acquitted of murder charges in New Orleans in 1891. This was the world Amadeo Peter Giannini was born into on May 6, 1870 in San Jose, California. His parents had immigrated to America just 1 year prior to having Amadeo Peter, or AP as they would often call him. His parents would struggle to make enough to get by in those early years, and it wouldn't be long before life got even worse. At 7 years old, AP's father was shot and killed after a laborer refused to pay back a debt of just $1. His mom would remarry, and at the age of 13, he would drop out of school to help out in his stepfather's produce shop. He worked hard there, becoming an apprentice to his stepfather and helping him grow the business. In his early 20s, he became a business partner in the store and grew it into one of the most successful stores in the area. In 1892, he married Clorinda Flores Cuneo, the daughter of one of the wealthiest Italian families in San Francisco. After several more years of managing the store and making investments into real estate around the expanding San Francisco area, AP decided to retire at the young age of 31. He simply felt he didn't need to work anymore. There wasn't really a reason to. He said, "No rich man owns wealth. He's owned by it. A man who aims to accumulate more than $500,000 should go to a psychiatrist." But this early retirement was far from the end of his story, as when his father-in-law passed away in 1902, he was in charge of managing the family's estate, and this included inheriting a large stake in a small San Francisco savings bank. In order to make the most of his new voting rights in the bank, he tried to learn as much as he could about banking as possible, which at the time had little to no regulations on its operations. He ended up going to the board of the bank and tried to convince them that banks across the country were doing things the wrong way. Waiting for wealthy people in the area to stop by and give them money was hurting the banks. He believed that poor but hard-working people coming to the West Coast were good loan risks for the bank. But the board refused to make any of the changes he requested of them, so AP resigned his position at the bank and took the $300,000 he had been saving and set out to open his own bank, which he said would be a bank for the people who had never used one. AP raised capital for this new bank, which he called the Bank of Italy, by selling 3,000 shares of stock, mostly to small investors, none of whom were allowed to own more than 100 shares. Although Giannini himself never held a dominant share of stock, the extreme loyalty of these and subsequent stockholders allowed him to rule his bank as though it were closely held. And Giannini just made the rules up as he went. He was not an experienced banker, and this was his first attempt at ever running anything in this industry. And early on, he began to make waves, including loudly denouncing the big interest, and he repeatedly offended influential members of the financial community, including local bankers, major Californian bankers, and many state and federal regulators, who were already uncertain about how to handle an entirely new way of banking. And this would make him many enemies as he tried to forge a new path in the banking industry. Every time he was faced with a new problem, he got creative, and nowhere was this more apparent than in 1906. Early in the morning on April 18th, 1906, 5:12 a.m. to be exact, a forceful shake was felt throughout the entire San Francisco Bay Area. An earthquake stemming from the San Andreas Fault was hitting the area harder than any time in the city's history. Violent shocks came in waves as the people were helpless to do anything but try to survive as the city crumbled around them. The earthquake was felt from southern Oregon to Los Angeles, and as far east as central Nevada, and even the often quoted death toll from the time of 700 people is believed to be underestimated by a factor of 3 or 4, because although the earthquake was incredibly damaging to the area, the fire it sparked caused arguably more damage. This fire would spread to the Bank of Italy's sole location. AP himself ran into the bank, grabbing as much as he could from the vaults before the flames could consume the building, hiding approximately $80,000 in cash in a wagon full of oranges to keep anyone from noticing. Toting this money down to the waterfront, he reopened the bank once again, setting a plank across 2 barrels to serve as his desk. He spent the rest of the day comforting devastated San Franciscans and telling them that they would rebuild an even better city together, effectively earning his title as the People's Banker. From here, the Bank of Italy would be renamed the Bank of America of California, which would later be shortened to Bank of America, as we know of it today. And it didn't stay a local bank for long. After AP's stunt after the earthquake, the bank grew rapidly. By 1910, it had assets of $6.5 million. And just 10 years after that, its assets had grown to an astounding $157 million. And he wouldn't let the boundaries of California's borders keep his bank from spreading, expanding out of California in 1927, paving the path for branch banking, opening banks all throughout the United States along the West Coast, while consistently moving further east as well. While his bank was weathering the Great Depression, he tried his best to sustain industries including granting loans for scientific research for vineyards who were struggling to make their crops prosper, and contributing to the arts as a producer for Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. In fact, from 1936 to 1952, he helped finance over 500 movies. But it would be in 1932 that he would go on to help create one of San Francisco's most iconic landmarks. You see, throughout the 20s, San Francisco was looking to build a bridge across the Golden Gate, a narrow strait that connected San Francisco Bay to the Pacific Ocean, which would lead to Marin County, California. They found Chief Engineer Joseph Strauss, who believed that he could do it for just $30 million. However, because the Great Depression was in full effect still, they were having a difficult time finding buyers of the bonds that were issued to pay for the project. That's when Strauss personally reached out to AP, who bought up the $6 million in remaining bonds needed to finish financing the project, allowing the 1.7-mile-long bridge to be built. The bank would continue to grow even after AP retired in 1934, and ended up doubling in size throughout World War II, especially as people flocked to California, eventually growing to $5 billion in assets, passing Chase Manhattan to become the world's largest bank. By the time of his death, Amadeo Peter left 2 foundations: the Bank of America Giannini Foundation for Medical Research and Educational Scholarships, and the Giannini Foundation of Agricultural Economics. Bank of America, on the other hand, continued the envelope-pushing culture of innovating, becoming the first U.S. bank to adopt electronic record-keeping, as well as the first successful credit card. Throughout his life, AP would often attribute his title as the People's Banker to his father, saying that nobody should ever have to die over $1. Thanks for watching. Leave a like below if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one.